So I'll call the meeting to order. And I think we have a roll.
Yes, we have Dick Bennett, we have Scott Badger, we have Huntley Allen, we have Jim Russell, John Allen,
Here.
David Campbell, and now Sarah. Absent is Bill, Chris, and
So the alternate company. Will be great tonight. And minutes of last meeting. I wasn't here, so I can't comment too much.
I will do
Second.
Awesome.
Any discussion on them? Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And public comment on any matter not before the planning board this evening. And I guess your view.
I am Kay Richardson from Bergeron Technical Services. We are presenting before you the plans that were approved at town meeting this year to swap. It's boundary line adjustment, even land swap. This is just a housekeeping item that was approved by the voters. We need it to be signed, and then we'll have it recorded so it's official. Okay?
Have you guys all looked at the plans?
I have the Mylar here, which will be recorded. That's the one that the signature is important for.
And if you don't mind, can you, Kate or Katie?
Kate.
Can you describe
Sure.
what the purpose of the,
So the purpose of this is to clear up two encroachments. The first encroachment is on the subject property of the Helfriches, and that is Vista Way comes onto the property here. And then on the right of way to Vista Way, the house was built in the right of way. So this is an even land swap down to the square foot. And it clears up, now the road is in the right of way, and now the house is on the property.
and doesn't change frontage?
Nope, nope, it's an even swap, in fact.
And that's,
And this was discussed at town meeting and approved by town.
Yeah, so you don't even have to vote on it.
yeah, and it's
Decide
supposed to be
the neighbors.
submitted to the planning board. I'm not sure what submitted really meant, but.
And it just needs our signature.
Thanks.
Were you bringing a check?
Yeah, I have the checks to have it recorded, and then we will take care of the recording and get copies back to the town for records, along with the recording information, so we have proper deeds and everything in effect.
Is it just the one signature and going? It's been so long since I've done this. This is just the one signature, this is not going to do it right now. You have.
We have to sign all.
all.
We have to sign all.
Yeah, sign all of them.
Yeah.
And I'll line it for you so we can just fan through them. Can I borrow that one from you? I said borrow, but I'm actually gonna take it. Alright. So, right there, sir. Today is the 11th.
SCOP.
Oh, I'm right, you want to read it?
You have the official one?
Yeah, this is when it gets recorded.
And does that take a special pen?
No.
Nope. Almost set on the other hand.
That's the problem, what's being here in town meetings.
This is so funny.
I've done this before. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your time. And with that, I'll be on.
Thank you. All right.
Can I just add that I'm really glad that this has finally come to an end? I mean, this goes back
It's
years.
been a long time, yeah.
It has been a long time, and it's appropriate. And it's one of those little messes in town that's really nice to have cleaned up.
Thank you all. Have a good
Thank you.
night.
All right, next, solar power. So I did try to read it. There's a lot there. And I kind of bounced back a little bit and, what are we trying to do in sort of layman's terms? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? Are we trying to promote something? Are we trying to protect ourselves from something? Both. Before there's a lot here. There's a lot to be, it says it's sort of a draft ordinance, but there's a lot here that's not yet written. There's suggestions you want to include this type of thing, and make sure you do this and that. So there's a lot to be done, I think, especially against the commercial and the more involved projects. But again, so what is it that we're really trying to accomplish with the ordinance? I'll leave that for a second.
Yeah, what do we want in town? Do we want something like Lovell ran into, and I think that's probably the impetus to get going on this. And if we don't want one as big as Lovell, what size do we want, or do we want to get protections against that, saying, you can have a solar farm that's 10 acres, but at 10 acres, you shouldn't be able to see it from any other road, or, buffers and other controls for it.
Which in Jackson, makes it somewhat difficult, given how mountainous the terrain is. We're not up above everything, and you have a lot of blockage around you.
And if it's up on a hill, then everybody sees it.
Right.
And so, can you put it, and you've got forest land, which is not gonna happen. So, the land that's in private ownership, are there pieces that are big enough to put a large solar farm? Or is it a case that really the biggest we get is something that's a couple of acres or 5 acres or however? I mean, they've got different sizes here, where it was nice of them to kind of give you the different categories.
I found that to be the most valuable of the ready.
Yeah.
It's just the definition of the terms.
Right.
So I thought that was the different types was valuable to know.
Right, I mean, that is one way of defining it.
Yeah.
But, so what do we want? How many here have solar on their house? Okay, 2 of us.
And I would add right now that as we design the protections that we would like to put in, we should word it thinking that in the next 20 years, there's going to be great pressure for solar. And I would say that if we're not careful, that many of the protections that we put in will be nullified because it will become that important. I would say it may take 30 years to catch up in New Hampshire, But it's gonna happen, and it's gonna be, I wouldn't want to put into words something that is really gonna be thrown out and leaving us naked. So I think we should be careful how we craft our words and the protections, because I think it'll be important to have that in place. But I wouldn't want to see it nullified from the state or even federal, when that's our desire. So that's my only,
Although in that case, I think we would have some time to, rework our laws to, to conform to what, whatever the state is handing down, but it may be different than what we start with.
Well,
And I just thought that this was not really to limit, but to put guidelines and structure, versus right now, there's nothing. Somebody can come in and do whatever they want, and we can say nothing about it. And this was just to say, if you do, we'd like you to make sure it's covered. If I want to put one in my front yard, that's fine, I'm not, bothering anyone, but if I want to put, 20, 30 panels, then I want to cover it. I mean, that's the way I read this. And last month, we did talk about that we were only going to be looking at the village and maybe rural residential, like the commercial doesn't apply to us. So we were going to take that whole section.
Right, we don't have industrial, but we can allow anything we want in what we
Yeah.
do have.
Right.
Zone, it's just,
And then the question is, do we want to have it just that you can do it, or do they suggest a CUP, conditional use permit? Or we say, okay, you go ahead and put it on your roof, but if you're going to take your agricultural field and put 100 panels on it, we want to have a little bit more control. Do we permit it? So questions we have to ask.
maybe a percentage of the land area would be something we could think about. That way it couldn't get too carried away. I went up to the one north in Maine this past weekend and passed 2 solar farms, and they are at old farms, or one was a working dairy farm, but it was, I'd say 2 or 3 acres of panels. So if we can restrict, say, if you're gonna do a ground array, how much of the land you can cover.
right, but it also, especially here, visibility of
Yeah.
that land.
To me, that's the key.
I mean, frankly, if Black Mountain Ski Area had to cease operations as a ski area, it would make a pretty prime location for a solar farm, having
Southern exposure.
angled southerly
Yeah.
exposure. The top and south side of Tyrol ski area would also be a perfect place to, put up something, but both of those are gonna be highly visible.
How about certain elevations?
Yeah, but, in Jackson, you say this elevation, well, you have ridges that are above and below, it's sort of, a particular elevation, I was, when this came up with just development of ridges, if you pick, say, 1,500 feet, or, there are ridges down to 1,200 feet, and that particular elevation is sort of arbitrary. And you also have, well, if I'm up on a hillside looking down, why is, development that I'm looking at below me any different than looking up at a ridge? I remember that being a very tough thing to, but again, if we limit, in going through the definitions, I think there's general agreement, we want to allow residential. Does anyone think that that's an issue that we need to be concerned about?
I think we want to promote it.
Yeah.
I think community solar, or especially where we have cluster developments, I take it that that's what that would be for, correct? I think that's a good thing. And then accessory agriculture, you know, I see that as good. I could see even, you know, an operation like Black's here, you know, supplementing their power with solar. I think we've always treated Black in that agricultural kind of exception.
10 years from now, with technology, you know, solar panels may
Oh, yeah.
not be, you know, or wouldn't interrupt people's view as much as they do
Yeah,
now.
true.
So things would
Right.
change.
It's when you get into the commercial stuff that you run more risk in terms of being intrusive in some way. And also that's where, you know, as I said, I think that's really where the.
Is there a limit on what a residential person can produce, i.e. be semi-commercial?
I said 10 kilowatts.
I think it's
Right?
in the,
I'm sure we can change that if we want, that's a suggestion, 10
There is
kilowatts
a
or 500 square
kilowatt.
feet.
I think with the power company for residential,
right, I think there's a state regulation right
I
now.
can't
that-
remember what it was, I saw it one time.
The power companies are doing a lot of lobbying against people doing, you know, their own solar, or trying to restrict it because it's competition.
If they don't make it, even the co-op, which is, the co-op is ours, but they're not totally user-friendly. I mean, it's a process to get through, but they do support it. So I think that they would work with us. I know that the highway department in this array on the roofs, we got to the end and, you know, they had to have a bigger transformer, and it's like, no, it's not producing any more than what we're drawing in. If you've got a 200 amp service in this building, we're not putting out 200 amps at any time on the solar, but in their calculations, they required a spring for a bigger transformer. But anyway, it worked out, and it does work out with them, and I'll say that our array has, for 5 years now, my bill has been $32 a month, which is the basic. You get charged that if you're using no electricity, but you have a meter.
To your monthly hookup, just to be part of the system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't have storage. I want to, put it back on the grid. And then, on a dark day in February, I'm not generating much, although I have credits in the bank. The co-op does save that for me, and that gets me through, like January, February. I'd rather be on the grid. I believe in the grid. I think that it's a good way to distribute power. And I like the fact that I'm just adding a little to it.
Well, the way net metering works, you used to get, it's as if your meter was running backwards, but now the way they do it is that there's a certain rate that they charge if you're using their power. And then if you have your solar, you're making more than what you need yourself, then you get credit. And it's at a slightly lower rate.
Well, they have the infrastructure of the
Right.
grid to maintain, so they have to, balance it out someplace there. And
But in summertime, I mean, with ours starting at about in May, it ends up that you get credit, and because at least with our array, that we're making a lot more energy than what we're using, and so right now, I just got my bill and it was for a negative $300. So, you know, that's gonna help going into the fall, and then as Dick says, when you get into January and February, especially if your panels are covered with snow and you
Right.
aren't able to get the snow off, then you're using their power, but you get it, it evens out.
So I think we talked about last month, we're going to try to go through, I wouldn't say line by line, but at least section, I know you started with the definitions, kind of
Okay.
going section by section to say, what do we keep, what do we don't? Because this is going to be probably a 2 to 3 month process.
Well,
To
yeah,
do.
let me ask to start, do we want commercial solar in Jackson? Or do we want to tackle that part of it? And if so, do we want to allow it in residential?
Oh, you mean allow a commercial enterprise in the residential district section?
If we only allow commercial solar in our commercial, our village district, there's really nowhere to put it.
Right.
You know, unless the golf course shuts down. So that's essentially saying no
Right, is it-
commercial.
Right, because the two aren't really compatible.
Right. But we don't have to say we don't allow commercial.
Well, the only
To
problem.
Dick's point, we don't have to say that.
Right, the only problem though is
We
if we don't say it, and then someone does find some spot, then we haven't covered ourselves. You know, if we just ignore commercial, because again, I think that's where really you get into,
Right.
you know, how it's installed and what kind of engineering is required and all the site work stuff.
Well, you just saw, a couple of weeks ago, I took a copy of the paper. 2 weeks ago, Freiburg is debating this because they have too many commercial solars. And so they want to put a moratorium on it. So they're, to your point, they're going to put this thing out. They allow the groups to show up. Now they're saying, whoa, we're getting too many of these things. So how do we vote on a moratorium to prevent them from?
Can we limit the size to a certain year or?
And I'm not necessarily saying we should never allow commercial or never allow over a certain size. It's more, do we start by focusing on the residential community and accessory agriculture, say no commercial, but with the idea that we're going to go back to this once we kind of get that initial stuff that we know that we want and is a little bit easier to handle. And then with a little experience, you know, then dive into the commercial. But
Actually, these definitions, I think these are ones that whoever created this draft, they came up with. And I think if I don't think we're bound.
oh no,
to
we can
do that.
change that. yeah,
Change the
sure,
name.
yeah.
I think if we want to, if you read these, you can see that each one is allowing a little bit more as far as
Yeah.
kilowatts AC or the
Square
land
footage.
coverage. So we could say, I mean, if we wanted to limit it, is that you're allowed to have solar on a ground array up to what, X% of your land or
Mhm.
X number of acres, up to that, and then have the various restrictions as far as you
Yeah.
having buffered and all of the glare, noise, and the other aspects that are covered here. And the question is, do we just say, go ahead and do it as long as you're, follow all these rules, or do we want to have it so that they have to bring a plan to the planning board so that we can make sure that they're following all the rules?
In the minutes from last month, we kind of explored this idea, and I thought I looked at the minutes about, I thought we were trying to have Kevin, the building inspector, be more of the oversight
Okay.
and the selectmen. So
So,
they would have to bring plans, kind of like a building permit,
as opposed to a
conditional
subdivision.
use. I mean, I'm just saying that's what we discussed last week,
Or-
keep it away from us.
Or the conditional use permit is what would involve us.
Right.
How does that work? I mean, you were involved in getting it for the short-term rentals.
Right.
And the way it's mentioned it here, it all goes through the planning board. Now, what are the, what's the mechanism?
Well, and that is why we you know, the planning board has to be part of that approval process, that's why short-term rentals come.
But then the selectmen have to be too,
I don't recall if they have to be too.
because that's what's set up for short-term rentals.
I think for short-term rentals, because, you know, policing that, managing that would not be something the planning board would do. So that may be why the selectmen are involved, because they need the ones that will need.
Because it goes down to the one section where they talk about the kind of the system layout, the plans, because this is where they talk about conditional use permit.
Right,
They would have to do this, and we would have an application, and we have to prove it. But we don't do site, we talk about this, we don't do site plan visits. The
right.
building inspector can, so they can actually go out and make sure that whatever they're saying in this is.
And so that, if you want the building inspector involved, you have to, it has to go through the selectmen then, is that what you're saying?
I'm still trying to read up and trying to figure this out, but
'Cause
I got it from Bill, was he was trying to keep us out of it
okay,
and have the building, have it just like, if I put in a garage, if I want to put in a driveway, they don't come to me, they don't come to the planning board to get that approved.
right,
This is the same thing, they're building something on their property, maybe, because on the grid, they don't even mention, when you look at the grid that they designed, there's only a few incidences where conditional use permit is even required on their grid. And
right.
on their grid, it was the primary architecture, which could be something like Black Mountain. To that size, yeah, they gotta come to us to kind of get a conditional use permit to change that. But if you're a residential, there was no conditional use permit. If I want to put them up on my property, I can put them up on my property. These
But there still
guys,
should be a limit.
but these guys are saying, yes, if I want to put it up, I should have shrubs covering it.
Yeah, yeah.
I should, you know, that, but
Right,
that's a
right.
building inspector
Yeah.
responsibility, not the planning board's responsibility. Make sure they have shrubs in front of their.
I mean, personally, I'd like to steer away from the conditional use permit. It's been somewhat confusing already. It is something that goes with the land, so once we permit property, then there, you know, that carries that permit forever. I'm not sure. I guess it gives us, I mean, Jackson doesn't have site plan review. That's the tool that
Yeah.
will really help, you know, help us look at particular projects and
Right.
say
And
this is
site plan review is just for commercial stuff, isn't it?
for Jackson.
For the site plan review itself.
Oh,
That's what I thought, it was just commercial, but
I don't know.
that it doesn't,
Well, it says non-residential carport, you could do it a roof mount. For historical, I don't know if we have any designated historical
village.
district. That
Yes.
that would have to be approved because it's doing something in the historical district. That's the way they spell it out.
Yeah,
But I mean, in theirs, it's only primary agriculture and commercial in a rural residential, which is the exact same reason why we have it for short-term rentals.
mhm.
It's in a rural residential and they're kind of doing something outside. So that's what they use is that.
That's,
And then the commercial gets down into those large and industrial.
Right,
But basically, village and residential, there's no conditional use permit. I had a question. If somebody got a conditional use permit for a short-term rental, does that cover anything they want, or is the conditional use permit on a per issue?
It's for short-term rental.
Okay, so that's conditional use. So if they put a solar panel, they
Yeah.
would have to get a
That'd
another.
be different.
Got it, okay.
and we should think of words for a commercial installation on commercial property. So we have non-conforming commercial property like Black Mountain. So we want to make sure that they can't just go, oh, we're already a commercial enterprise, we can put these panels in without any further permitting. So I think we should think of words to make sure that we still have some leverage over how they do that even though they are non-conforming. To me, it would be adding to the non-conformity, but let's put it down.
They don't have to go after a change of use.
So I don't know, maybe they would have, I think they would come in initially and just say, we're already a commercial enterprise, we're just gonna be more commercial.
Yeah, I would, my feeling would be to steer away from using those terms residential, commercial, and just say that a roof-mounted solar array up to a certain size is permitted. And then as you get larger and maybe into ground mounted, then a plan has to be submitted and approved before you can do it.
Yep.
And it has
Well, what
to be
is the
submitted.
approval process?
Right, so that we would have,
I mean,
we'd have to
Yeah,
spell
you
that
can-
out.
Yeah, you can say there's a maximum of 10 kilowatts, or you could say maximum of 500 square feet. But the one thing you can't say is, what do the neighbors think? And that's a big deal. I mean, this is an area where people care about what things look like.
Yep.
That's why they come here, you know? And so somehow, some way, we have to have an indication if conditional use is gonna be granted, that the abutters, or the people who are in the town.
Well, I mean, I think we can say, I don't think we have to go to conditional use.
Yeah,
That's what I was trying to avoid.
We can just say, you know, it has to be screened in a certain way,
Yeah.
bushes and, I mean, I'm not sure I wanna, you know, I feel like allowing some amount of ground mounted for, you know, someone who doesn't have an appropriate roof or their
Right.
roof doesn't
Right.
face an appropriate direction. So I think in the same way, if we're gonna allow residential roof mounted, we ought to allow some
Yeah.
size of ground mounted as well.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
same, you know, without some sort of permit.
well, but that was my point, Scott, is that if we're gonna have a conditional use, there ought to be some ground rules in there,
Right, and
you know,
so we can say up to a certain size, if it's ground mounted.
shielded from public view.
Yeah, if it's ground mounted, it can be only up to a certain height,
Yeah,
maybe, and then shielded in some
Yeah.
fashion.
So I believe you have to have a permit anyway, don't you, to do it?
From,
I had to get a permit for my forced hot water, you know, I heat my water with, you know, a panel outside, I had to get a
Uh-huh.
permit. If I put it on cement blocks, I didn't, but I put sonotubes in.
I don't know.
The permit is from, I mean, I put my generator and I had to put it on concrete.
Right, I had to get one.
Kevin, and I didn't even get a permit.
But you're getting a building permit, right,
Yeah.
right.
But not-
Well, then maybe you could roll this all into building permits.
Yeah.
We
And the
just set the
building
guidelines.
permits then would have to be approved, and Kevin would then be inspecting.
Right.
Because this, you're building something.
Right.
It's a structure.
Has to have a certain amount of rebar in it, and, you know, concrete compressions, stacks and stuff like that. It's not something that average Joe could do. So definitely something Kevin would have to oversee.
Right.
But the one difference being that, you know, if you build a barn, the neighbors are probably not going to complain. If
Right.
they build a solar array, they might.
Yeah.
So, you know, do we also need to consider that sort of difference? And I like the idea of sort of getting away from all the different shades of that, you know, and saying up to a certain amount is what we allow, you know, and it's, maybe we have this much on the roof, or any amount on a roof that's.
Yeah, I would think any, because you have it, people are seeing the roof anyway.
Right.
And the only thing that might, glare and noise may be issues, but,
Do we allow for a larger system for a cluster development? Or, you know, they have this community solar definition, but
or if you have a cluster development.
You can see cluster development might do a single larger array.
Array
than
for
feed
everybody,
For
yeah.
everybody.
It seems like you'd have to pick a green space too, on a certain spot. I mean, somebody had 5 acres and they stripped it, put solar panels on it. It seems like there should be a certain amount of green space to it. And we also need trees.
Well, and also, well, for a cluster development, you have to have a certain amount of common area,
Yeah.
what it's called. And so is this part of the common area, or is this something you have to do on
Well,
property?
that's where you get where percentage of land, of your land area. You can only go to an X percent. And I think, in the groundwater, as far as impervious you can only go up to a certain percent of your land to be impervious. I don't have the wording in front of me. We're saying,
So they suggest that for residential up to 10 kilowatts.
Mhm.
Is that reasonable? And I don't know solar, or, less than 500 square feet. I assume that 500 square feet is even close to reasonable now, it will be reasonable,
Yeah,
a year from now.
the technology, as Dick mentioned, the technology is likely to
Right.
really change, so
But-
has it changed then? I mean, our zoning ordinance is not
Yeah.
cast in stone. Every year we have
that, yeah,
opportunity to change it.
But is the 10 kilowatts, is that limit to limit the size of the structure, or
Yeah.
is that no one needs more than 10 kilowatts?
What is
No,
your,
it's the size of the structure.
it's the size, right?
Yeah.
Because there again, 5 years from now, you'll get 10 kilowatts out of
Yeah.
half the size.
yeah,
Right.
something this big might
Right,
be
so
able
at
to
that point,
generate.
you'd be like, well, why can't I do 20 kilowatts?
Yeah.
Because it's only gonna be the same size as it was when you wrote the ordinance.
Well, it's double. See, it's 10 kilowatts and less than 500 square feet.
And also, we can adopt, as we run into new technology, we can update.
Sure.
Yeah.
We can deal with what we have now. And then if the time comes that, yes, you can get, 10,000 watts out of,
Right, I mean, right now it
200
says,
square feet.
it says 10 kilowatts or less and less than 500 square feet.
Yeah.
So to your point, in 5 years from now, if they can put 20 kilowatts on less than 500 square feet, do we modify that to say 20 or less? But I think they do allow you to say, no,
Well, I guess my question is, if they have the 500 square foot limit, why limit the power that you can get out of it?
Yeah,
You can have an or instead of an and.
that's a good idea.
Yeah,
Because
the
it's-
power thing is gonna go up with time, that's gonna happen, so why go into that? The power thing is not obtrusive, it's the size, it's obtrusive.
Right, it's the height.
because it goes through, it says community is 100 kilowatts and 1 acre. And then it goes up even further than that, and then because there's the group, the large commercial, industrial, utility, and of course, we'll probably never have a solar power station, but then you're talking megawatts.
Yeah.
I mean, megawatts in up to 250 acres, 150 acres. You could group those all together to say,
Well, no, what I'm saying is, what I'm trying to get away from is these categories that they've set out, because we're not bound for them, and we don't
No.
have to be bound to them. And I think it's more a case of saying, all right, you can do solar, you can do it on your roof, you can have a ground-mounted one, and it has to be up to a certain height, it has to be covering less than X percent of your land acreage,
Mhm.
or limit the number of
Square feet.
Square feet,
square feet
yeah.
of coverage.
And that would be
And then if
obviously
it's-
appropriate for right now.
Right,
And
and
things could
it
be-
would be residential, or you could have a business
Sure.
to do it. You've got, businesses downtown on Conway Daily Sun's got a whole array of it on their roof. And, a lot of businesses are picking up on it. We've got them, here in town on the municipal building, so.
So
How
if
do
we-
you want to address the potential of like Black Mountain coming to us, want to put it in all up on mountain, want to close the ski lot, and want to make that solar?
Well, then, think about how, you know, if you say, you know, X number of square feet, then they would have to be within
I think the trickier one would be in Black or the Davis, you know, Camden said. We want to use it as something, they want to go the accessory agricultural route, and, you know, they don't put any limits on that. And I'm guessing that if they wanted to, you know, put up several installations in different fields, or a Black one, put up a, you know, a small panel on each of the tower lifts,
it.
you know, it would quickly add up to more than 10 kilowatts or more than 500 square feet. I guess the question is, do we want to allow, you know, for the commercial enterprises, you know, the larger commercial enterprises that we already have in our residential district, do we want to allow them to use solar for supplemental power?
Hmm.
And what we have here for residential probably would really be of no use to them.
Yeah, I mean, accessory agriculture is, if Black Mountain wants to stay, Black Mountain wants to get off the grid, the Davis Farm, that's what the way it is.
I mean, I do think that if Black wanted to turn into a solar farm, that's a change of use. It's worth checking, but I'd be surprised if they could just simply say, oh, we're already a business, we can go ahead and do this, you know. If we don't have specific regulation for commercial solar in place. I see it more as Black wants to put a, you know, 4 meters, you know, 4 square yard panel, you know, on each of the lift towers, you know, something like that. Yeah, which really wouldn't be very intrusive, because it'd be all broken up.
Yeah.
Seems like it'd be great to help, you know, for them to cover their power costs a little bit. Be great for Jackson, Black can, you know, keep going.
Keep going.
Yeah, I mean, Eagle just did their rewiring, but Eagle Mountain could do the same thing.
Right.
They have a big golf course.
Right, and do we want to limit Eagle to 500 square feet, you know?
Well, it doesn't have to be 500 square feet, we can figure out whatever number we want. We could say that, you know,
I think since if we're trying, you know, if we want one rule that covers it all, you know, say 1,500 square feet, that probably isn't very neighborly, you know,
right.
if you have, you know, for just residential.
Because like, that would fall somewhat in the commercial solar. Because they would probably have to put more than one ground array on some property if they wanted to do their entire hotel and everything associated.
They do say up to 1 megawatt.
Yeah, commercial
It's
is
up to, it's less than 5, so yeah.
and up to 5 acres. So that's a commercial.
Would it,
It's odd, the accessory has no limits.
But it's really for farm.
I know, but
And we can modify it to say any commercial business, regardless of what it is, they could do it.
Would you say up to a certain size, and if it's any larger than that, it would have to be discussed at town meeting, let the town decide?
Yeah, I mean, that's what they said in this document, if it's, that would be a conditional use permit. For the larger sizes, you have to come in front of somebody to get the blessing to do it.
you're right. I just don't know how much leeway is there in that conditional use situation. I mean, you know, here are all the rules, and if you meet them, you're good, or is there any kind of review sort of tool? But
We can create whatever we want. That's the problem. We can create whatever we want.
Well,
We just have to
that's-
agree that this is what we're going to create.
well, I think for conditional use permits, there is, you know, we are somewhat limited as to how we apply those.
Correct.
And they're a very specific sort of thing. But I guess we gotta try to move forward here in some fashion.
Well, if we want to conditional use permit and put it within a building permit.
Right.
It might be worth exploring that option to see if that's feasible.
Well, I guess my assumption was that once they're able to construct, you know, that solar array, whether it's they're just meeting the rules that we set out, or if there's some sort of application involved, you know, I just assume there's going to be then a building permit process for the construction of that array. It's really more, what are we going to set out as what's allowed? And, yeah, we all agree residential, and, you know, you stuck to the sort of numbers that they're talking here. Do we want to have some secondary class for agriculture, Black Mountain ski area?
The Black Mountain wouldn't fall into that category by definition, if you look at the definition, because they're not a farm. This is for a.
No, but we
It'd
could
be like the Davises want to go off the grid.
Right,
And
but again, we can create whatever we want. We really just have, we have the Davises and the Davis Farm, and we have Black Mountain ski area, there's not, I mean, other than.
You have Davis Farm, but then they also have like music and pasture, which is screened and out of the way.
Mhm.
You could, I don't know how visible that would be, like Doublehead or whatever, but if you have your regulations in that it has to be screened, then it would be a hard task for Black Mountain to put solar arrays down the slopes and have it screened. I mean, that's visible.
But if they're just doing it for their own purpose, because agricultural, because these definitions are not defined by this. If you Google that word, you'll get the same definition by anybody. It's for a farm who wants to go off grid. So they don't want to put a limit because they don't know how big farms are. So they allow them to do whatever they want, because it's only for their purposes. Black Mountain's not a farm, it's a business. It'd be like Eagle. They fall in the same bucket that Eagle is. If they're doing it for themselves, again, it's just solely for themselves, it would fit that they should have limitations on how much they could do. Both Black Mountain and Eagle should have limits. Because they could build that whole parking lot, Black Mountain's parking lot, they could convert into
A carport,
a carport with
Yeah.
solar panels all on top.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
They get nobody, they interfere with nobody.
right.
And according to this, they can put them up into like about an acre, or 3 acres. They can turn that whole, I doubt they'll ever do that, but somebody could change that into a carport and put solar panels on top and go off the grid.
Sounds like a good idea.
I'm just saying that we should at least consider commercial solar as something we need to define, to prevent, not to prevent it, but to put limits on it, to say it has to be this, it has to have coverage, it has to, they could put a bunch of ground poles there on the parking lot.
Yeah, but you have a height, would have to have a height limit,
For commercial,
Right?
right?
Any ground you can have.
Ground mount.
but if it's ground mounted in a commercial site.
Well, there's ground mount and pedestal mount.
Yeah,
Well, it is two different
yeah,
arrays.
Mm-hmm.
And a pedestal mount is nice because you can articulate it to the sun. It can track the sun all day. Or the season, it can, tilt so that you have the option of an optimal exposure. But if we stick within our 35-foot height limit for any structure, we're gonna have, ground array, pedestal mount, in a parking lot where they could still park
Sure.
around it. So and that would be visually, I mean, that would have quite an impact.
Well, I guess I don't see how we can allow something like Black or a farm within the same limits that we would like to apply to residential, right? Because we would have to allow more than what we'd want to allow for residential. So I think we start with residential, tonight.
Well,
And-
look at the Conway Daily Sun. Would you want an array like the roof of the Conway Daily Sun here in Jackson? There'd be a lot of people moving out. It's a pretty ugly setup.
Yeah, I mean, ugly to a degree because it's an older
Yeah,
array.
yeah.
I mean, I'm guessing there are some homes in Jackson that have, one side of the roof
Yeah,
covered like
yeah,
that.
but this sticks way up above the roof.
Who's the guy up on Carter Notch? That's Phil's house. Doesn't he have a mounted array sitting in his front yard?
Oh, Carlson? You across from,
Across from,
across from
Golf course.
across
the
from,
golf course,
He's
yeah,
got
that's,
beautiful flowers.
right.
He's got an
He's
array
got
sitting in his
You
front
you
yard.
really don't see them.
You don't see it.
I don't
No.
see it.
Except in the wintertime when there's no trees.
yeah.
He's the only one that sees it.
Yeah,
Right.
no, I'm saying, so I mean, that's a great example of a nice one,
It is.
Yeah,
right? You
So
don't
it's
see
free.
it unless
Right.
it's the wintertime and there's no trees.
So it does say somewhere in here, I guess it's a suggestion that you don't include the panels as part of your
Yeah.
height restrictions.
yeah.
Because if someone's at 35 feet already, they can't.
If it's with a roof mounted.
Right, but I think we could say that the panels can't extend more than 5 feet above the roof.
Above the roof, that's a good way
Roof
to
line,
put
or
it.
something like that. We can limit them according to the roof line.
Yeah.
So they're
So
not
if
sticking
you had
out.
a 35-foot house with a flat roof you wouldn't want a flat roof up here, but slightly sloping one,
Mhm.
yeah, they could get it at the proper angle to get the optimum,
Right, but what Jim's saying is that, like the Daily Sun, when you have panels on the roof, but they're.
They
angled
stick
up like
10
that,
feet above the roof,
you know,
or more.
It's a lot more intrusive than panels
Yeah.
that are just flat.
right.
I mean, and maybe, I just threw out 5 feet, and maybe someone
Yeah.
can tell us, up, at what angle, what size panel, you're only gonna go up, no more than 90 degrees, not up that far. And depending on the size of the panel, that's gonna tell you how high it is, but some height restriction above the roof line would
Yeah.
alleviate that issue. 10 kilowatts, is that a good starting number for residential?
Right. Well, because usually
Do
they
we know
have
what that even
AC.
means? I mean,
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either.
It's AC power instead of DC.
Yeah, I know, but the rating, like the rating the inverter is, I'm gonna have to check on that, because as they say in their introduction, that they call it as AC, because then it's converted, because the power that comes off the solar panel is DC. And so you have to have an inverter to change it to AC to be able to use it with AC appliances. So they've elected to use the AC output. And I'm not sure that, I'd have to check on that as to,
Yeah, it's
because
fine.
I know there's a limit. You could only go up to 5, originally you could only go up to 5 kilowatts, and I don't know whether it was AC or DC. And then they managed to get through the state to get, to increase the amount that you could have with a residential display.
Yeah, for some reason, they define it as, because of incentives, is how you get incentives from AC, is defined as AC, and same as other areas of regulation, other regulatory agencies use AC as their definition.
Okay.
So they've converted it to AC, so it's a consistent.
Okay.
It's 500 square feet, reasonable size. I mean, part of the problem is we're all sort of shooting in the dark here.
Right.
We're not really a lot of information as to what's suitable, what's not necessary. Would Kevin, how familiar is he with solar, that
No, I can follow up with them.
it'd be great to have someone here that can
Right, we should,
give little feedback as to, what does the residents need,
what is a reasonable limit as to? Well, I think that, since the roof mounts aren't that obtrusive, is that if you could cover your whole roof if you wanted to. I don't think we should limit it
by square footage.
by square footage for the roof mounted. It would be a ground mounted one that is, would be more needed to have limitations there.
Right, yeah, there was wrong with doing your whole roof.
This is 10 kilowatts,
Would we still?
needs 30 to 40 panels.
Would
Depending on the
we,
efficiency of the panels.
would we want to limit the capacity at all, or just roof is unlimited and ground mount is up to this much, and you can generate as much as you want, or whatever you can get within
It's
those
one way you
parameters?
could do it.
Again, I don't know why we care how much power is generated, so long as they're not, it's not back, throw away into, selling.
Put it in big buildings so that you can just have.
We have a bunch of empty.
And have more limitations on ground mounted as far
Right.
as
Do
visual buffers and,
we limit ground to 30, you said 30 or 40 panels, you know what size?
That's what it
Does
says
it
here.
say what size the panels are?
No,
Just wonder if it's more than 500 square feet.
yeah.
And there's multiple kinds of
Well,
ground.
there's a picture of one here, so that's the 10 kilowatts.
There's multiple types of ground mounted. You can have mobile ones, as you talk about, like,
traffic ones.
or you can have the fixed ones. Or the ones that you have to move yourself.
These look like they're about 2 feet by 4 feet.
All right, well, we're not moving forward very quickly here.
No,
But it sounds like we have some things that we sort of need to look into.
well, I think you asked the main question when this discussion began, is what is it we're trying to accomplish here? And I think that's a good question for the next meeting. Maybe we should all think about this.
And how do you know whether it's residential or commercial?
Yes.
And doesn't matter.
Now,
And doesn't matter.
how? Because we could get in the same situation we got with short-term rentals where they don't consider it commercial.
Well, if we say we don't care what you put on your roof, as long as it's flat enough to the roof, and you can only go up to this size on the ground, and then if they have enough roof area to make it commercial, then they don't care.
Build a whole bunch of buildings and just put solar panels on. Empty, nothing in them, just build a building.
Just frame them up. and-
Just a shell.
Again, the value of land in Jackson, any kind of commercial solar operation is pretty
Electricity isn't that.
It will be.
Yeah, but I don't think that's,
It will be.
personally, I don't think that's our big concern.
No, I don't say, I don't.
It's the commercial side. We have to protect it,
Yeah.
that, but it's that, because it's gonna become popular, everyone's gonna wanna put it up, and we're just gonna have a bunch of solar panels and be driving around town.
And we definitely need the power,
Right,
and we will in the future.
yes.
So how do we do it so it keeps the beauty of the town, but, you know, and if anything you read is, any town that restricts it, you are gonna lose in the future. You cannot restrict the use of solar power.
Are you, do you mind talking to Kevin?
No.
If he's willing, you know, one, how familiar is he?
Because it was talked about last
Almost,
month.
almost in any case, if he could, you know, be here.
Yeah. And now we're right into the next meeting, because it was, Chris last month did talk about, you know, finding out from Kevin what he knows, is there any classes that he can go to? Because if we put the responsibility of him being the overseer of this, you know, are there classes that he can go to learn more about the electrical side and the installation side and be more comfortable? I don't know what his comfort level is right now. You know, did you, now, it sounds like you have that.
We have solar panels, yes, we've had them for a number of years, yeah.
You didn't need any permit from anybody?
We need a building permit.
Building permit. Just that you were gonna build something. Did Kevin
Well-
come out and inspect it?
But
Yes,
you're
he
wiring,
did.
you're wiring
Okay.
it and.
Was it just
Yeah.
wiring?
Yeah, and it's, the people that we had do it, he, actually Kevin, our original installation, he said, you know, this is really well done. There are some people who are electricians who really haven't been educated or trained in putting solar panels in or in doing shoddy jobs, and he said this was done right. So,
So there must be something somewhere.
And I think that Kevin Bennett is looking at structure too. He didn't want to load up a roof that,
Right.
say, a house got built with 2x6 rafters. He's not going to allow, you know, another, I don't know how many pounds per square foot, but over what would be a
No.
respectable limit on that. So he'll look at that, and I know he does.
So I'll talk to Kevin.
Okay.
Because I want to know, like, was it the electrical side that he was looking at? Or was it, you know,
yeah.
he's probably not looking at the aesthetics only because you're putting in a roof, so we care.
And
Or whatever we do,
RGPC
like you said, it can't be considered restricting.
No.
Because that's against every movement that's going on in the country, but maybe we can use the term like regulating instead of restricting,
Yeah.
you know? Or recommending, or, you know, some little more moderate term.
Well, I think what we're trying to do is, we want to allow
Yes,
as much solar panel as possible without infringing on the reasons that people come to Jackson,
yes,
which is aesthetics
yeah,
and visual. As you say, we've got solar panels in actually quite a few of them, probably more than you realize, because some of them are very, like Carlson's is very nicely placed, so you only see it when
yeah,
you're actually at the front door.
yeah.
But I think the discussion came about because of a few years ago with the cell towers. You had just put in something in place when all of a sudden they came knocking at your door and you luckily had something in place to say,
Right.
yes, but this is the box you've got to live in.
Right,
We just want to have the box that people
we
live
want to make the box.
It's just this one involved residences where cell towers didn't, so it's a lot easier to create a box.
when people aren't involved.
Well, it's that fine line of trying to promote something and not let it get away from you, you know,
Yes.
you're trying to walk, and that's a,
And I think there's,
obviously leads to problems.
as you go through some of the, you know, what they have here, the conditions, the screening, you know, land clearing and emergency response, natural resource impacts, buffers. So there's a lot in here. Structure for the box
Yeah,
is here, and I think.
Yeah. the only thing that was missing that I don't know if anybody did is the disposal
Right,
at the
That-
end.
that
When
needs
somebody
to
wants to get rid of, what regulations, does the government, the feds have any, does the state have
Right,
any
and-
restrictions?
Now, I've got it over here saying to recycle. I think,
Whatever the rules are for
yeah,
recycling. I don't think the transfer station would take it.
no, but recycling into more solar panels. Reusing.
Anything else on that tonight?
No.
Dick,
I'd like to make a motion
would you?
to adjourn the meeting.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Third, fourth, fifth, and sixth.